Since the start of this decade, iRacing have released a whopping 55 cars, ranging from your favourite grocery getter to full-on Formula 1 cars. But there was one sensible electric vehicle in there. And I've been given the task of deleting 50 of those cars and telling you what my top 5 cars on iRacing are. Hello everyone, welcome back to the Traxion YouTube channel. Yes, you heard it right. Since 2020, iRacing have released 55 cars. It absolutely blew my mind. And I've got to somehow get rid of 50 and give you my top 5. Now, for example, there are cars in iRacing that have been released since 2020 that I just couldn't include. The Brazilian stock car, brilliant car, like a big touring car with a V8 engine, push to pass, but nobody's driving it. So if you can't get a race every day online, well, it's not going to make the cut. And a couple of cars on this list might surprise you, but there is method in my madness. So first up, we go back to season 3 of 2021, and it's the Formula V. Now, the Formula V is based on stock parts from pre-1963 Volkswagen Beetles. And the Formula V has been the proving ground of many race drivers, including the likes of Niki Lauda. Now, it's powered by a 1,200cc engine producing round about 69 horsepower, but it's light. Including the driver, it only weighs about 400 kilos. The suspension and brakes are quite primitive, and it's got treaded tyres. So even though this is a rookie car, it's actually not that easy to drive, and I would go as far as to say that it's really hard to drive fast. And there's one main reason for that, and that is because it's got a H-pattern shifter. Now, you might say there's lots of cars on iRacing with a H-pattern shifter, but this is a H-pattern shifter with a synchromesh gearbox, which means you need to use the clutch for it to engage the next gear. Now, you can't just lift off the gas on the upshift and rev match on the downshift. You've got to use the clutch, which means heel toe. Yes, you can use the paddles and the clutch assists on iRacing, but you're never going to be as fast as you would be if you can master the H-pattern shifter and the heel toe technique. But for most circuits, you'd only be using 3rd and 4th gear. Now, 1st gear is only really used for pulling out of the pits. 2nd gear is only used for the tightest of tight hairpins. So for the majority of circuits, you're actually just going to be using 3rd and 4th gear. Now, I'll try and explain now why the Formula V is in my top 5 cars released this decade. Now, the skills that you learn in the Formula V, it's a rookie car. So this is going to be one of the first cars that you drive on iRacing, depending on which path you take, whether you want to go down the Formula route or the sports car route. Now, this will teach you how to race a Formula car. Racing a Formula car is completely different to racing in a tin top or a sports car because it's open wheel. In a tin top, you can trade a bit of paint, you can lean on a car a bit more, you can bang doors. With a Formula car, you can't do that. If your wheel touches another car's wheel in a Formula car, well, the chances are somebody's going to be going off the track. So this teaches you how to race in a Formula car. You might need to put your front right wheel in between the wheels of another car. This teaches you how to do that. And the skills that you learn in this, you can take on to the Formula Ford or the Formula 4 or the Mercedes Formula 1 car, the Super Formula Light. The principles are exactly the same when racing this car to racing any other Formula car with regards to where you position your car and how close you can get to the other cars. Now, the other thing that is really important with the Formula V, which is transferable to every other car on the service, it's momentum and how to be smooth. Because to carry momentum through a turn, you've got to be really smooth with your inputs, with your brake, your accelerator and your steering, but you've also got to be really smooth coming off the brake as well, which will help you loads in other series, even GT3s, prototypes. Coming off the brake is as important, in my opinion, than getting on the brake. How you come off the brake But that really affects how your car behaves and how much rotation that you've got into the turn. So we'll try and pick up the pace a little bit more now. So you can see my inputs under my webcam. Now, I won't be braking particularly hard at all. Probably not even braking up to 60, 70% at any point. In fact, I know I won't be. You don't need to. Especially around Okayama. It's all about flow. It's all about momentum. And I'll try and show you at some point how the car behaves if you're a little bit more aggressive, if you're not smooth. You can see I'm trying to just bleed off the brake as much as I can. And if you can master that technique in the Formula V and then drive another car and apply the same technique, well, you're going to go faster. There's no two ways about it. You're going to go faster. So it's all about holding that trail brake to the apex. It's all about getting off the brake nice and smoothly. Now you can see I'm heel toeing here. A very bad attempt at heel toeing, by the way. And then using a little bit of a hybrid braking technique. So I'll try and be a little bit aggressive on the brakes going into this right-hander. You can see there, it just doesn't want to behave. It just doesn't want to behave. And how hard did I brake there? Up to about 70%, I think, braking. That's all. No slick tyres. These are cut tyres. So you're never going to have the most grip you could possibly have. And the brakes and the suspension are quite primitive in the Formula V. So it's all about being smooth. And that's the reason why, or one of the reasons why, that this car is in my top 5. It's a really good fun car to drive, but like I mentioned, not an easy car to drive fast. So the next car takes us back to season 4 of 2020, and it's the Dallara P217 LMP2. Now, there isn't a fancy hybrid battery system on this car. It's just powered by a 4.2 litre V8 engine, producing round about 600 horsepower. So if you followed me on my channel, you'll know that I don't really drive anything with downforce. It just seems a bit binary to me. You're either on the gas or on the brake or turning in at a particular point. It's just a little bit robotic. But with the LMP2, it feels a bit different. On corner exit, the rear end will just get a little bit lively. You can just add a bit of counter steer just to combat that. It just feels a little bit more fluid, a bit more fun to drive, a bit more involving, which I like. Now, another reason why I've chosen the LMP2 in my top 5 is, for me, this kind of changed how the modern multi-class racing looked on iRacing, in the IMSA series in particular. Before the LMP2 arrived, we had the GTEs racing with the Honda HPD, which has now been made legacy content. The LMP2 arrived and replaced the Honda, which then eventually led to the GTEs being replaced by the GTDs, or the GT3s, and also the introduction of the hypercars. So we've got a true multi-class series now on iRacing, which replicates the real world, and we didn't have that before the introduction of the LMP2. And in my opinion, that kind of sparked the whole resurgence of that multi-class series, because it was never as popular as it is now. And obviously it's really popular now because it mirrors the real world series, and we're getting new cars added. The GTPs are getting updated. But the LMP2 has been there since the start of the modern era of the IMSA series on iRacing. And it's an absolutely fantastic car. It really is a superb car. Like I said, it moves around a little bit on corner exit. It's not an easy car to drive. It doesn't have any ABS. It does have traction control, but it doesn't have any ABS. So you need to be very careful. You need to make sure that your brake pedal is set up correctly. But if you do set your brake up correctly, you can brake super late with this car. It's really heavily sprung, so you can't take the curbs that aggressively in this. You know, it's your typical prototype. But it just feels a little bit more engaging to drive than the other prototypes. I think it sounds incredible. There's no batteries to worry about. You don't have to worry about recharging batteries. All you've got, I think it's a 4.2 litre V8 engine. That's all you need to worry about. It is a driver's prototype. You know exactly what you're going to get from this car. You know exactly what you need to deal with. So for those that find the GTPs a little bit too complicated to drive, well, you'll find this a little bit easier and a little bit more engaging, in my opinion. So that's why the LMP2 is in my top 5. And I never ever thought that I would put a prototype car in my top 5 cars released this decade on iRacing. Considering some of the cars that have been released, they've been outstanding. But one of the other reasons why this is in there is because it's got its own series as well. So if you don't want to race the Insta series, you can race in the LMP2 fixed, which pretty much every week splits. Every race, just about. If it's a good track, it will split. Really popular. Good training tool for the IMSA series as well. So there's plenty of series where you can race the Dallara LMP2. So it's not a waste of money. A cracking car. Now for the next car, we fast forward a couple of years to season 2 of 2023, and it's the Ray FF 1600, aka the Formula Ford. Now people have been racing these cars since the late 1960s. It's powered by a 1.6 litre Ford engine producing around about 116 horsepower, but again it's light. Including the driver, it only weighs 504 kilos. But don't let looks deceive you. This is a full-on race car and everything can be adjusted. Now, not only is the Formula Ford in my top 5 cars on iRacing, it could quite well be my favourite car on the iRacing service. And there's a few reasons, and I'll explain those as we drive around. Now, the first reason is this. This car has got a H-pattern gearbox, but not a gearbox like the one in the Formula V. This has got a dog box, which means you don't need the clutch on the upshift, or you don't need the clutch on the downshift. On the upshift, all you need to do is lift off the gas, just take the strain off the gearbox, and on the downshift, all you need to do is blip the throttle and rev match. Now, I'll try and talk in between gear shifts because this shifter is quite loud. It's quite industrial. So I'll try and talk in between gear shifts, which won't be easy, but I'll try. So that's the first reason why I really like this car. Anything with the H-pattern gearbox is a win for me. A little bit more involving to drive. Now the second reason is that this car is an absolute joy to drive. The handling is superb. Like really, really good handling. It's got one tyre, so the tyre that you've got on now is the same tyre if it's raining. So you've got one tyre to get used to. This car does move around a little bit, which I like. So when it starts to slide, if you can identify it early that it's going to slide, then you can just add a bit of counter steer and control it. You don't lose too much time. I think it handles absolutely brilliantly. It really does. And I've had some of the best racing ever that I've ever had in sim racing in this car. I had a few races last season, I think it was, at Summit Point in the Formula Ford, and I've never raced as close to other people ever. If you get in a split with some like-minded people, the racing can be absolutely unbelievable. And you're never gonna be without a race in this car. This race splits all the time. There's two series. There's the Rookie Series, and there is the D-Class Series, which is open, where you can make adjustments to the setup. But in the Rookie Series you can't, it's just fixed. And I'm a fan of anything with a fixed series as well. Level playing field. You'll find me driving more fixed series than anything else. Then you know it's all about driver talent. Or lack of. So you can see there, the car's a bit loose. Just had a little bit of counter steer. Controls it. But yes, so there's a lot going for this car. Handles brilliantly. It's super popular. Really popular. So you're never going to be without a race. It's rain enabled. I mean, there's nothing to dislike about this car. And the skills that you develop in this car will be transferred to other cars, because it's really important that you smooth this car. Just like I mentioned in the Formula V, you've got to be really smooth with this car. And that will pay dividends in any of the series that you decide to race in. But it will still bite you in the backside if you do that. Next up, we go back to Season 1 of 2023, and it's the Toyota GR86. Now, the GR86 is the official car of the all-new Toyota GR Cup, which is Toyota's new all-single-make road racing series. Now, all of these cars in the real world series start their life as a normal production car. Then they're sent to Toyota Gazoo Racing, where they work their magic, fit them with a 6-speed sequential gearbox, a new bodywork package including that large rear wing, powered by a 2.4 litre 4-cylinder engine. Now, you might wonder why the GR86 is in my top 5, because, admittedly, it's not the most exciting car to drive. But that's not why it's here. Now, I always say the slower the car, the better the racing. And that's definitely the case with the Toyota GR86. I have had some of the best sim racing ever whilst driving in the Toyota GR86. The racing is always super close. This is, in my eyes, a little step up from the Global Mazda MX-5. So if you enjoy that kind of racing, then you will enjoy the racing in the GR86. It's similarly paced to the Mazda MX-5, although the GR86 does have a big wing out the back to help with downforce. So especially on the faster stuff and lifting off the throttle, the rear wing does give you a little bit of protection, where in the Mazda you would be going sideways, where in the Toyota the car is nice and planted, nice and settled, and pretty easy to drive. But the racing is good. Now, another thing that you can guarantee from the Toyota GR86 is that no matter what time of day, no matter where you are in the world, you're always going to get a competitive race online in the GR86. There's multiple splits right throughout the day. So no matter what you're iRacing, no matter what time of day, no matter where you are in the world, you're always going to get a split and be racing against people of a similar skill level. And that's not always the case with some series. There might not even be a split in some series. So if your iRating is 1,200, you could well be racing against guys in some series with an iRating of 6,000-7,000, which isn't really fun for anybody. But with series such as the Toyota GR86, because there's so many splits, you're always going to be racing against people of a similar skill level. Although the racing can be a little bit rough and tough So just enter the GR86 series with caution. Make sure that you're up to speed because they don't take prisoners. It can be really, really tough. I did a race actually here at Summit Point a few weeks ago. And I think I said in the video that there was lots of unnecessary aggression. And I don't know what it is with this car. It brings out the aggression in some people. That can be fun, and I'm all for aggressive racing. You know, and trading paint and banging doors, that's fine in my book. But for some reason, some people just use this series just to try and force their way forward by any means. That being said, though, it wouldn't stop me racing this series. I enjoy it because the racing's always that close. And as long as you have your wits about you, and as long as you try and identify early on who the problems may be, then you'll be absolutely fine. But the car handles brilliantly, quite easy to drive, lots of splits. What's not to like? I think it's a cracking car, and that's why it's in my top 5. Now finally we go back to season 4 of 2021, and it's the Porsche 911 GT3 Cup, the 992. Now this replaced the old Porsche Cup car on iRacing, but this one's got more power, around about 510 horsepower from its 4-litre flat 6 twin cam engine. Surprisingly, this car's not that heavy. Including the driver, it only weighs 1,260 kilos. Of course, there was never going to be a top 5 cars on iRacing without including the Porsche Cup car. Now, the Porsche Cup car has always been one of my favourite cars to drive on iRacing, and the old one was possibly one of my most favourite. However, the new one, when it was introduced, people thought that it was a little bit easier to drive, a little bit more forgiving, and maybe it is to a point, but let me tell you, the Porsche Cup car on iRacing is possibly one of the most difficult cars that you can try and hustle around a track. Now it's a Porsche, so the engine is all the way out the back, which means that you've got this pendulum effect. So turning in is always quite tricky. There's always the potential for over-rotation on corner entry. And because there's no traction control, there's always the potential for huge oversteer on corner exit. Now, one thing that makes this car even more treacherous is, with it being rear-engined and there's no ABS, it's prone to a lockup or two. So if you're not careful, before you know it, you've locked your front tyres and you're going straight on and you're not making the turn. But that's the main reason why this is one of my favourite cars in sim racing, because the level of accomplishment when you nail that lap or you complete the race, it's like nothing else that I've experienced in sim racing. Because this is such a tricky combination, there is a real sense of accomplishment when you don't crash. And a lot of people might not like that, but it's really, really rewarding when you get it right, but really punishing when you don't. Now, the Porsche Cup series, there's two. There's the fixed and the open, and both of them, more often than not, split. So more often than not, there's more than one split of people racing. So wherever you are in the world, you're always going to get an official race in the Porsche Cup series. And that's what you want. You want series where people are participating, Because otherwise, what's the point? You can have a really good car, but if nobody's racing it, what's the point? But with this car, you've got an absolutely incredible car to drive. Super tricky, really rewarding, and you're always going to get an official race at any time, 24/7. I absolutely love this car. So there we go. That's my top 5 cars. Now, I've had to take quite a number of things into consideration when putting them on the list. It's not all about how the car drives, and it's not all about what the participation's like. It's a mixture of both. Now, all of the cars that I've mentioned, you can race them pretty much 24/7, no matter where you are in the world. They're all really strong series. And a couple of the cars, you can actually race them in more than one series. So the GR86, for example, you can race that in the Production Car Challenge and the GR Cup. The LMP2 can be raced in the LMP2 Fixed and the IMSA Fixed. Similar story with the Race 1600. You've got the Fixed and Open, and the same with the Porsche Cup car. You've got the Porsche Cup Fixed and the Porsche Cup Open. So lots of series to enter with just those 5 cars. And the best thing is, 3 out of those cars are actually free. The Formula V, the GR86 and the Race 1600, they're all included in the base subscription. But let me know down below in the comments what your top 5 car list would look like. I bet you out of all the comments, there isn't one comment the same. But that's the beauty of sim racing. But as always, thanks for watching. Have a great week. Keep it pinned.